This is HOA mess. The key ring was the detail she forgot. Your file says you ignore warnings. Melanie Brooks stood in front of me at the mailbox cluster in Maple Ridge, holding a clipboard like it was a warrant. I had walked over to check my mail on a Tuesday afternoon in Las Vegas, and she was already waiting. She pointed at me with one hand and shook the clipboard with the other. "You took paperwork from the office," she said. "A vendor invoice is missing, and you were the last person logged into the system." I work as an IT compliance auditor, so I know how records work. I had logged into the HOA portal 2 days earlier to check my account balance. That was it. I said I did not take anything. I checked my balance online. She held up her phone. "I have video," she said. But the screen showed a cropped still image, grainy and unclear, showing nothing but a blurry timestamp and a partial view of a desk. She did not play a video. She just waved the phone and said, "This proves you were in the office." I said, "That is a photo." "You said you have video." She lowered the phone and stepped closer. "You do not get special treatment," she said. "I am the vice president of this association, and I am telling you right now that I will report you to your employer if you do not cooperate. I know where you work." That hit me hard. I am trying to refinance my house, and any accusation like this could wreck the deal if it showed up in a background check, or if she called my HR department. I said, "You cannot just accuse me without proof." She smiled. "I already told the neighborhood group chat you are a thief, and you cannot undo it. If you fight me, I will make it worse." Behind her, I saw her golf cart parked on the curb. It had a small blinking amber light mounted on the roof, like she was running some kind of patrol. That golf cart had become a fixture in the neighborhood over the past 6 months. She used it to follow residents, to block driveways, and to make herself visible during any dispute. It crawled at walking speed and made a low whining noise that carried across the desert quiet. I said, "What do you want me to do?" She tapped the clipboard. "You need to return the invoice by the end of the day. If you do not, I am suspending your access fob today. You will not be able to get into the gym, the pool, or the clubhouse, and I can do it today because I have authorization." I said, "I do not have an invoice. I never took one." She shrugged. "Then you have a problem." I walked back to my house, which sat 2 blocks away in the Maple Ridge subdivision. The neighborhood was all tan stucco and red tile roofs baking under the Vegas sun. Packages sat on porches for hours and sometimes disappeared. The HOA had been cracking down on package theft for months, and Melanie had been leading the enforcement push. She had installed new cameras at the mailbox clusters and started requiring residents to report any deliveries over $50 in value. It sounded reasonable at first, but it turned into a surveillance system that she controlled. I checked my email as soon as I got inside. Nothing from the HOA. I checked the portal. My account was still active, no notices, no violations. I called the management company, and the woman who answered said she would check with Melanie and call me back. She never did. That night I got a text from a neighbor I barely knew. It said, "Did you really steal from the HOA office? People are talking about it in the group chat." I opened the neighborhood chat, which was a private group on a messaging app that Melanie moderated. The messages were brutal. Someone had posted a screenshot of a blurry photo, and Melanie had commented underneath it, saying, "This is the person who accessed the office during the window when the invoice went missing. We are pursuing all options, including law enforcement." She had not used my name, but she had posted my house number in a separate comment. Everyone knew it was me. I scrolled through the replies. Most people were angry, some were skeptical, but no one was defending me. One person said if he stole once, he will steal again. Another said, the HOA should ban him from common areas until this is resolved. I typed a reply. I said, I did not take anything. I checked my account balance online. I was never in the office. But the message did not post. I tried again. Still nothing. I checked my profile settings, and I saw a banner that said, "You have been restricted by a moderator." Melanie had kicked me out of the chat. I could read messages, but I could not reply. I could not defend myself. The accusations kept piling up, and I was locked out. The next morning, I walked to the management office, which was located in a small building near the front entrance of the subdivision. Melanie was already there, standing at the front desk and talking to the office manager, a woman named Sandra, who looked tired and annoyed. I walked in, and Melanie turned to face me. "You cannot be here," she said. "You are under investigation." I said, "I am allowed to talk to management. This is a public office." Sandra looked at me and said, "What do you need?" I said, "I need to see the access log for the office." Melanie is accusing me of taking a vendor invoice, but I was never physically in this building. I only logged into the portal from home. Sandra nodded and said, "I can pull that for you. Give me a minute." Melanie stepped between us. "You do not get to request records while you are under investigation," she said. "That is not how this works." I said, "There is no investigation. You accused me in a group chat and suspended my ability to respond. That is not an investigation. That is harassment." Sandra said, "Melanie, let me pull the log. If he was not here, the log will show that." Melanie turned to Sandra and said, "You are not authorized to release records without board approval. I am the vice president, and I am telling you not to release anything until we complete our internal review." Sandra looked uncomfortable. She said, "I will check with the property manager and get back to you both." Melanie smiled. She said, "Good. And while we are here, I need you to suspend his access fob. He has violated community trust, and we cannot allow him to use common areas while this is unresolved." Sandra said, "I cannot do that without a formal hearing." Melanie set a bright orange traffic cone on the desk. She said, "This is a safety concern. I am marking this as an emergency enforcement action under Section 12.4 of the governing documents. You have the authority to act immediately." I said, "That is not a real procedure." Melanie ignored me. She pulled a laminated policy sheet from her bag and slid it across the desk. Sandra picked it up and read it, then set it down and said, "I will need to confirm this with the property manager." Melanie said, "Fine, but his fob stays inactive until you do." I left the office and went back to my house. I checked the portal again, and this time I saw a notice posted to my account. It said, "Compliance hold pending investigation. Access privileges suspended." It was dated that morning, posted less than 10 minutes after I had left the management office. Melanie had done it anyway. I called an attorney that afternoon. I explained the situation, and he listened without interrupting. When I finished, he said, "Do you have any proof that you were not in the office?" I said, "I have my work calendar. I was in a meeting during the time she is claiming I was there. I can pull phone records, location data, anything you need." He said, "Get all of that together. Print it out. Make copies. If she is threatening your employment, you might need to file a police report to create a paper trail. But first, you need to clear your name with the HOA. Do you know anyone on the board who might help you? I thought about it. I said, there is a former board member named Bill who lives a few streets over. He resigned last year after a fight with Melanie. He might talk to me. The attorney said, start there. And document everything she says and does. If she is framing you, she will slip up eventually. I found Bill that evening. He was working in his garage when I walked up, and he recognized me immediately. He said, let me guess. Melanie. I said, she is accusing me of stealing a vendor invoice. She threatened to report me to my employer. She suspended my access fob. Bill wiped his hands on a rag and said, she is running a scam. She has been doing it for months. Packages, petty cash, clubhouse supplies, anything she can grab. She accused me of taking pool chemicals last year, and I had receipts proving I bought my own. She did not care. She just wanted me out of her way. I said, do you have proof? He said, I have old files, board minutes, vendor contracts, budget reports. I kept copies when I resigned because I knew she would try to rewrite history. Come inside, I will show you. Bill led me into his garage and pulled a large binder off a shelf. It was tabbed and organized, with blank-looking pages that he said contained copies of board minutes, email threads, and vendor invoices. He flipped to a section near the middle and said, this is from 8 months ago. Melanie claimed a vendor invoice for landscaping was never submitted. She blamed the vendor and refused to pay them. But I had a copy of the email where she acknowledged receiving it. She deleted the email from the shared inbox and pretended it never existed. I said, why did she do that? Bill said, because the vendor was asking questions about a separate payment that went missing. She wanted to shut them down before they dug any deeper. She does this whenever someone gets too close. She frames them, she pressures them, and she moves on. He flipped to another section. This is from 6 months ago. A contractor said Melanie tried to recruit him to lie about a repair timeline so she could charge the HOA for emergency rates. He refused, and she banned him from the property. She told everyone he did shoddy work. He lost 3 other clients because of it. I said, do you still have his contact information? Bill nodded. He said, I will text it to you. And take this binder. Make copies of everything. You are going to need it. I took the binder and walked back to my house. I spent the next 2 hours scanning every page and uploading it to a secure cloud folder. I made 3 physical copies and stored them in different locations. I was not taking any chances. The next morning, I got another text from Melanie. It said, you have until 5 p.m. today to return the missing invoice and provide a written apology. If you do not comply, I will file a formal complaint with your employer and report you to the police for theft of HOA property. I did not reply. Instead, I drove to the police station and asked to speak to someone about filing a report. The deputy at the front desk listened to my summary and said, you want to file a report because someone accused you of theft? I said, I want to file a report because someone is threatening to report me for a theft I did not commit, and I need a paper trail in case this escalates. He said, that is not really how this works. If she files a report, we will investigate. If you file a report, we will investigate. But we cannot stop her from making an accusation. I said, I understand. But I wanted on record that I came in. I explained the situation, and I have evidence that I was not in the location she is claiming I was in. He nodded and said, "All right. Let me get some information from you." I gave him my statement, my work calendar, my phone location data, and a copy of the access log that Sandra had finally sent me after I threatened to file a complaint with the state. The log showed that no one had physically entered the office during the time Melanie was claiming I was there. The only activity was a remote portal login from my home IP address, which matched my account balance check. The deputy wrote everything down and said, "This sounds like a civil dispute. If she files a report, we will follow up. But based on what you are telling me, it does not sound like a crime was committed." I said, "What if she stole the invoice herself and is framing me?" He looked up. He said, "Do you have proof of that?" I said, "Not yet, but I am working on it." He handed me an incident number and said, "Keep this. If anything escalates, call us and reference this number." I left the station and drove back to Maple Ridge. I had one more piece of the puzzle to find, and I knew where to look. The HOA had installed new security cameras at the mailbox clusters 6 months earlier, and Melanie had been in charge of the installation. She had picked the vendor, approved the contract, and managed the footage. If she was stealing packages, the cameras would show it. But I needed access to the footage, and I knew she would never give it to me voluntarily. I called the vendor that afternoon and explained that I was a resident trying to resolve a dispute. I said, "I need to know if the cameras at the mailbox clusters are recording continuously or only on motion." The woman on the phone said, "They are motion activated. They record for 30 seconds after motion is detected, and the footage is stored for 90 days. I said, "Who has access to the footage?" She said, "The HOA board president and vice president. They have admin credentials." I said, "Can I request footage as a resident?" She said, "You would need to go through the board. They control access." I thanked her and hung up. I needed a different angle. I called Sandra at the management office and said, "I need to request security footage from the mailbox cluster cameras. How do I do that?" Sandra said, "You need to submit a written request to the board. They review it and decide whether to release it." I said, "How long does that take?" She said, "Usually 2 weeks. But Melanie has been denying most requests lately. She says it is a privacy issue." I said, "What if I file a formal complaint about harassment?" Sandra paused. She said, "That might speed things up. Let me check with the property manager." I hung up and started drafting a formal complaint. I included the timeline, the accusations, the group chat screenshots, the access log, and the incident number from the police station. I attached copies of Bill's binder pages showing Melanie's pattern of behavior. I sent it to the management company, the board president, and the HOA attorney. I CC'd Melanie. She called me 20 minutes later. Her voice was calm, but I could hear the anger underneath. She said, "You just made a huge mistake. I tried to give you a chance to fix this quietly, but you decided to escalate. Now I am going to make sure everyone knows what kind of person you are." I said, "You already did that. You posted about me in the group chat and locked me out so I could not defend myself." She said, "I have video of you in the office. I did not show you the full video because I was trying to be nice, but if you want to play it this way, I will release it publicly." I said, "Show me the video." She said, "You will see it when everyone else does." She hung up. I sat there for a minute, running through the possibilities. If she really had video, she would have shown it already. She was bluffing. But I needed to be sure. If you are enjoying this story, hit the like button and subscribe for more wild HOA drama. I drove to the mailbox cluster that evening and walked around the perimeter, looking for camera angles. There were 3 cameras mounted on poles, each covering a different section of the parking area and the mailbox kiosks. I pulled out a small flashlight and pointed it at one of the camera lenses, checking the angle and the field of view. The camera was aimed at the mailboxes, not at the walking path. If someone had approached from the side, the camera might not have caught them. I took photos of each camera angle and went back to my house. I opened the vendor contract that Bill had given me and cross-referenced the camera model numbers. I looked up the specs online. The cameras had a 60-degree field of view and recorded at 1080p resolution. They were decent, but they were not wide-angle. That meant there were blind spots. I called the contractor that Bill had mentioned, the one who said Melanie tried to drag him into a lie. His name was Mike, and he answered on the second ring. I introduced myself and said, "Bill gave me your contact information. He said you had a problem with Melanie Brooks a few months back." Mike said, "That woman is a nightmare. She tried to get me to backdate an invoice so she could charge the HOA for emergency work that was not an emergency. I told her no, and she banned me from the property. She told everyone I did a bad job, and I lost 3 clients because of it." I said, "Did she ever mention stealing anything?" Mike said, "Not directly, but she was always asking weird questions about how the vendors track inventory. She wanted to know if we kept logs of supplies we brought on site, and if we ever noticed anything missing after a job. I thought she was just being thorough, but looking back, it felt like she was testing the system." I said, "Did you ever see her take anything?" He said no, but I heard from another vendor that she was taking clubhouse supplies home. Cleaning products, paper towels, that kind of stuff. Nothing huge, but it added up. I thanked him and hung up. The picture was getting clearer. Melanie was not just framing me for one missing invoice. She was running a pattern. She stole, she covered her tracks, and she blamed someone else when the heat got too close. The next day I got an email from the board president. It said, "We have received your complaint, and we are reviewing it. In the meantime, we ask that you refrain from contacting board members directly and allow the process to proceed." That was useless. The board president was barely involved, and Melanie controlled most of the day-to-day decisions. I needed to force the issue before she buried the evidence. I spent the next 2 days digging through the HOA portal and pulling every document I could access. I found budget reports, vendor contracts, meeting minutes, and violation notices. I cross-referenced vendor invoices with payment records, and I found a pattern. 3 invoices had been marked as missing over the past year, and in each case Melanie had blamed a resident or a vendor. But the invoices had all been paid within the normal processing window, which meant the missing invoice claim was fake. She was using it as a cover to explain discrepancies in the budget. I built a timeline and exported it to a spreadsheet. I highlighted every missing invoice claim, every resident accusation, and every vendor dispute. The pattern was clear. Melanie would flag an invoice as missing, blame someone, and then quietly close the issue a few weeks later without explanation. The money always appeared in the budget eventually, but the accusations stuck to the person she blamed. I printed the timeline and added it to my evidence folder. I also printed a copy of the access log that showed I was never physically in the office. I organized everything into a clean, tabbed binder that looked identical to the one Bill had given me. I was ready. The showdown happened 2 days later at the mail kiosk corridor. I was checking my mail in the afternoon when Melanie rolled up in her golf cart, the amber light blinking. She parked directly behind me, blocking my path. She got out and said, "I need to talk to you." I turned and said, "Go ahead." She pulled out her phone and held it up. She said, "I am recording this. I want you to admit on camera that you took the invoice from the office." I said, "I did not take anything." She stepped closer. She said, "If you admit it right now, I will drop the fees and the complaint. But you have to do it in front of witnesses." I looked around. 3 neighbors were standing near their mailboxes, watching. One of them had her phone out. Melanie had staged this. She wanted a public confession that she could post in the group chat. I said, "I am not confessing to something I did not do." She raised her voice. She said, "You are a thief. You took HOA property, and I have proof. If you do not admit it right now, I am going to make sure your employer knows exactly who you are." I stayed calm. I said, "Show me the proof." She tapped her phone screen and turned it toward me. The screen showed the same cropped still image she had shown me before. No video, just a still frame with a timestamp. I said, "That is not a video. You said you have video." She pulled the phone back. She said, "The video is on file with the board. You do not get to see it until the hearing." I said, "When is the hearing?" She said, "When I schedule it." I reached into my jacket and pulled out the evidence binder. I opened it to the first tab and said, "This is the access log from the management office. It shows that no one physically entered the office during the time you are claiming I was there. The only activity was a remote login from my home IP address." Melanie glanced at the binder and said, "That does not prove anything. You could have accessed the office remotely and deleted the invoice from the system." I flipped to the next tab. I said, "This is a timeline of every missing invoice claim you have made over the past year. 3 invoices. 3 different people blamed. But all 3 invoices were eventually paid within the normal processing window. That means the invoices were never actually missing. You just said they were missing so you could justify enforcement actions." Melanie stepped back. She said, "You do not know what you are talking about." One of the neighbors watching said, "Wait, is that true?" I turned to the neighbor and said, "Yes, she has been doing this for months. She accuses someone of theft, she threatens them, and then the issue quietly goes away. But the accusation stays on record." Melanie said, "That is a lie. You are making this up because you are guilty." I flipped to another tab. I said, "This is a statement from a contractor named Mike, who said you tried to get him to backdate an invoice. He refused, and you banned him from the property. He is willing to testify if this goes to court." Melanie's face went red. She said, "You are harassing a board member. That is a violation of the governing documents. I can fine you for this." I said, "I filed a police report 2 days ago. I have an incident number. If you file a false report against me, you will be charged with making a false statement to law enforcement." She stared at me. The neighbors were watching. One of them said, "Melanie, did you really accuse him without proof?" Melanie said, "I have proof. I just do not have to show it to him right now." I said, "Then show it to them." She looked at the neighbors, then back at me. She said, "You do not get special treatment. I am done talking to you." She turned and walked back to her golf cart. She climbed in, started the motor, and drove away slowly, the amber light still blinking. One of the neighbors walked over to me and said, "I did not know she was doing that. I saw the post in the group chat, and I thought you actually took something." I said, "She locked me out of the chat so I could not defend myself." The neighbor said, "That is messed up. I am going to talk to the board president." I closed the binder and walked back to my house. I knew Melanie would not let this go. She would escalate. But now I had witnesses. The next morning, I got a call from Sandra at the management office. She said, "The board president wants to meet with you and Melanie to resolve this. Can you come in this afternoon?" I said, "Will the meeting be recorded?" She said, "I can arrange that." I said, "Good. I will be there." The meeting was scheduled for 3 p.m. I arrived early and set up my evidence binder on the table in the small conference room. Sandra was there, along with the board president, a man named Tom who looked uncomfortable and tired. Melanie arrived 5 minutes late. She walked in carrying a leather folder and sat down across from me. She did not look at me. Tom said, "We are here to resolve the issue regarding the missing vendor invoice." "Melanie, can you explain your position?" Melanie opened her folder and pulled out a printed screenshot. She said, "This is a portal access log showing that he logged into the system during the window when the invoice went missing. He had access, he had opportunity, and he has refused to cooperate with the investigation." I said, "I logged into the portal to check my account balance. I never accessed any vendor invoices. The system tracks which pages you visit. Sandra can pull that data." Sandra nodded. She said, "I can pull that. Give me a minute." Melanie said, "That does not matter. The invoice is missing, and he was the last person in the system." I said, "The invoice is not missing. It was paid. I have the payment record right here." I opened the binder and slid a printed page across the table. It showed the invoice number, the payment date, and the vendor confirmation. I said, "The invoice was paid 3 days after you claimed it was missing. You closed the case without telling anyone." Tom picked up the page and read it. He said, "Melanie, is this accurate?" Melanie said, "The invoice was missing at the time I filed the report. It was found later." I said, "Then why did you keep accusing me after it was found?" Melanie did not answer. Tom said, "Melanie, did you suspend his access fob without a hearing?" Melanie said, "It was an emergency enforcement action under Section 12.4. Tom said, "That section does not exist. I checked the governing documents this morning." Melanie said, "Then it was a different section. I do not remember the exact number." I said, "She is lying. She made it up. She set a traffic cone on the desk and told Sandra it was an emergency. Sandra can confirm that." Sandra nodded. She said, "That is what happened." Tom looked at Melanie and said, "Why did you do that?" Melanie said, "Because he was under investigation. I had the authority to restrict access." Tom said, "No, you did not. Only the board can suspend access privileges, and only after a hearing." Melanie stood up. She said, "I am not going to sit here and be attacked. I have been serving this community for years, and I do not deserve this." She grabbed her folder and walked toward the door. Tom said, "Melanie, we are not done." She stopped and turned. She said, "Yes, we are. I am filing a formal complaint against him with the county, and I am requesting that the board pursue legal action for defamation." She walked out and slammed the door. Tom looked at me. He said, "I am sorry. She has been difficult to work with for a long time, but this is the first time I have seen her cross the line like this." I said, "She has been doing this for months. I have statements from other residents and vendors. She frames people. She threatens them. And she uses her position to intimidate them into silence." Tom said, "Can I see the binder?" I slid it across the table. He spent the next 20 minutes reading through the timeline, the vendor statements, and the contractor complaint. When he finished, he said, "This is serious. I need to bring this to the full board." I said, "Do you believe me?" He said, "Yes, and I am going to recommend that we remove her from enforcement duties immediately. But I need to follow the process." I said, "How long will that take?" He said, "A few days. Maybe a week." I said, "In the meantime, she is still posting about me in the group chat. She is still threatening to report me to my employer. I need this resolved now." Tom nodded. He said, "I will talk to the property manager and see if we can issue a temporary restraining order on her enforcement authority. And I will personally post a message in the group chat clarifying that the accusations against you are unfounded." I said, "Thank you." I left the meeting and went back to my house. I checked the group chat, and Tom had already posted. The message said, "The board has reviewed the complaint filed by a resident regarding a missing vendor invoice. After reviewing the evidence, we have determined that no theft occurred and no violation was committed. The resident in question has been fully cleared. We apologize for any confusion or distress caused by this matter." The responses started coming in immediately. Some people apologized. Some people said they never believed the accusations. A few people said they were disappointed in Melanie. But no one defended her. I waited. I knew she would respond. She always did. 2 hours later, she posted in the chat. She said, "The board does not have all the facts. I will be presenting additional evidence at the next board meeting. This is not over." I took a screenshot and sent it to Tom. I said, "She is not backing down." He replied, "I know. I am working on it." The next day I got a text from Bill. He said, "I heard about the meeting. Good work. But be careful. Melanie is not the type to walk away quietly. She will find another angle." I said, "I am ready." Bill said, "There is one more thing you should know. About 6 months ago, a package went missing from the mailbox cluster. The resident filed a complaint, and Melanie said she would review the security footage. She never did. The resident eventually gave up and filed a claim with the delivery company. But I always wondered why Melanie did not follow through." I said, "You think she took the package?" Bill said, "I do not know. But it would fit the pattern." I spent the rest of the day reviewing the security camera vendor contract. I found the contact information for the account manager and called her. I said, "I am a resident at Maple Ridge, and I need to request footage from the mailbox cluster cameras for a specific date range." She said, "You need to go through the board." I said, "The board vice president is blocking my request. I have a police incident number and a formal complaint on file." "Can I request the footage directly?" She said, "Let me check with my supervisor." She put me on hold for 5 minutes, then came back and said, "We can release footage directly to law enforcement if they request it, but we cannot release it to a resident without board approval." I said, "What if I filed a subpoena?" She said, "That would work, but it would take time." I hung up and called the police station. I asked to speak to the deputy who had taken my report. He came to the phone and said, "What do you need?" I said, "I need you to request security camera footage from the HOA vendor. I have reason to believe the person who accused me of theft is the one who actually committed the theft, and the footage will prove it." He said, "Do you have any evidence of that?" I said, "I have witness statements, a pattern of accusations, and a timeline showing that she has been stealing from the HOA for months. The footage will show her taking packages from the mailbox cluster." He said, "All right. Give me the vendor contact information and the date range you need. I will request it." I gave him the details, and he said he would follow up within a few days. I thanked him and hung up. That night, I got another text from Melanie. It said, "I know what you are doing. You are trying to turn people against me. But you are making a mistake. I have evidence that you took more than just an invoice. I have evidence that you have been stealing packages for months and reselling them online. If you do not drop your complaint, I will release that evidence publicly." I did not reply. Instead, I forwarded the text to Tom and to the deputy. I said, "She is escalating again. She is now accusing me of running a package resell scam. This is textbook projection." Tom replied, "I am meeting with the property manager tomorrow. We are going to recommend that the board remove her from all enforcement roles immediately." The deputy replied, "I will include this in the case file." The footage request took 3 days. The deputy called me and said, "We got the footage. You were right. She is on camera taking packages from the mailbox cluster on 4 separate occasions over the past 2 months. She opens them, takes the contents, and throws the packaging in a dumpster behind the clubhouse. It is clear as day." I said, "Can I get a copy of the footage?" He said, "We are opening a formal investigation. You will get a copy once we finish interviewing her. But I wanted you to know that you were right." I said, "What happens now?" He said, "We are going to bring her in for questioning. If she cooperates, we might be able to resolve this without charges. But if she does not, we will file a report with the district attorney." I said, "She is not going to cooperate." He said, "We will see." 2 days later, Tom called me. He said, "Melanie resigned from the board. She submitted a letter this morning. She did not give a reason, but I think she knows we were about to remove her." I said, "Did she admit to anything?" Tom said no. But the police contacted the board and said they are investigating her for theft. We are cooperating fully. I said, "What about my access fob?" Tom said, "It has been reactivated, and we are issuing a formal apology to you in writing. I am also recommending that the board change the enforcement procedures so that no single board member can suspend access without a hearing." I said, "Good. What about the group chat?" Tom said, "Melanie was removed as moderator this morning. We are appointing a new moderator who will enforce the rules fairly. And we are posting a clarification that your name has been fully cleared." I said, "Thank you." Tom said, "I am sorry this happened. We should have caught this sooner." The group chat exploded that afternoon. Someone posted a screenshot of a news article about the police investigation. The headline mentioned package theft and HOA fraud. The article did not name Melanie, but everyone knew who it was about. The responses were brutal. People who had defended her were now angry. People who had stayed silent were now speaking up. The rumor died in real time as people watched the proof. I posted in the chat for the first time in weeks. I said, "I want to thank everyone who supported me during this process. I also want to remind everyone that accusations can destroy reputations, and we should all be careful about jumping to conclusions without evidence. I am glad the truth came out, and I hope we can all move forward." The replies were supportive. A few people apologized directly. One person said, "I am sorry I believed her. I should have asked more questions." The police investigation took another 2 weeks. Melanie was charged with theft, fraud, and making false statements to law enforcement. She pleaded not guilty, but the evidence was overwhelming. The security footage showed her taking packages, the vendor statements showed her manipulating invoices, and the access logs showed that she had been deleting records to cover her tracks. The case was settled before trial. She agreed to pay restitution to the HOA, to the residents whose packages she had stolen, and to the vendors she had defrauded. She also agreed to a restraining order that prohibited her from contacting me or entering HOA property. The HOA board implemented new policies. Management took over enforcement decisions and removed all discretionary authority from individual board members. The security camera vendor was given direct access to law enforcement, so footage requests could be fulfilled without board approval. And the group chat was restructured so that no single moderator could silence residents. The fallout was slow but steady. Melanie lost her position, her reputation, and her standing in the community. She moved out of Maple Ridge 6 months later. No one knew where she went, and no one asked. I stayed. I refinanced my house without any issues. I served on the board for 1 term to help implement the new policies, and then I stepped down. I did not want to be part of the enforcement system anymore. I just wanted to live in peace. But I kept the evidence binder. I kept the police report. I kept the incident number. And I kept the timeline. Not because I needed it anymore, but because it reminded me that the truth always comes out. It just takes time, patience, and a willingness to fight back when someone tries to bury you. A few months after Melanie left, I ran into Sandra at the mailbox cluster. She said, "I am glad you stuck with it. A lot of people would have just walked away." I said, "I did not have a choice. She was going to destroy my life." Sandra said, "She tried that with a lot of people. You were just the first one to fight back." I said, "I had help." She said, "You also had the guts to stand up. That matters." I walked back to my house and checked the group chat one more time. The conversation had moved on. People were talking about landscaping and pool schedules. No one mentioned Melanie. The story was over. But I knew it was not really over. Somewhere out there, Melanie was probably doing the same thing in a different neighborhood, to a different set of victims. People like her do not stop. They just move on. That is why I am sharing this story. Because the next person she targets might not have the evidence I had. They might not have the support I had. And they might not know how to fight back. So if you are reading this, and you are dealing with someone like Melanie, Here is what you need to do. Document everything. Get witnesses. Build a timeline. And do not back down. Because the truth always comes out. It just takes time. Thanks for watching. And thanks for all the support.